Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Teresa LaFramboise, and I'm the director of the Native American Studies program and a professor in the Graduate School of Education. And my area is developmental and psychological sciences. It's an honor to open this evening's event, Red Skin Dreams, 20 years of curating Indigenous art at the Venice Biennale, a conversation that brings together history, storytelling, and critical reflection on Indigenous presence in global art worlds. This evening, we're honored to hear from Professor Nancy Marie Mithlo, whose work has fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the circulation of Indigenous and art across international contexts. Drawing on 2 decades of experience from 1997 to 2017, Professor Mithlo curated 9 exhibitions at the Venice Biennale, one of the most visible and historically exclusive stages of the global art world. What makes this story especially powerful is not that Indigenous artists were present in these spaces, but how that presence was made possible. As Red Skin Dreams reveals, these exhibitions were not driven by traditional art world gatekeepers, elite galleries, major museums, or commercial collectors. Instead, they emerged through Indigenous networks, relationships, collaborations, and commitments that crossed borders and connected communities from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and across Europe. This was, as Professor Milthlo describes, an improbable and messy process, one that was deliberately non-institutional, non-commercial, and anti-hierarchical. And yet it is precisely this approach that enabled something transformative, not just inclusion within existing structures, but a rethinking of those structures altogether. At its core, Red Skin Dreams is more than a documentation of exhibitions. It's a theorization of Indigenous presence. It challenges the idea that Indigenous artists exist on the margins, asking questions instead: what happens when we shift the frame entirely? What if the center is not fixed? What if Indigenous knowledge, relationships, and artistic practices define the terms of engagement? Professor Mithlo brings a deeply interdisciplinary perspective to this work. She holds a PhD in cultural anthropology from Stanford University and is a leading scholar of race and representation. Her research examines how Native American and Indigenous arts are produced, circulated, and interpreted both nationally and globally. Her approach is grounded in ethnographic methods and institutional critique, allowing her to illuminate not just artworks, but the systems that shape their visibility. She's currently a professor in gender studies and American Indian studies at UCLA, and she's a citizen of the Fort Sill Apache tribe with ties in Oklahoma and New Mexico. Nancy's work is both intellectually rigorous and deeply rooted in community, history, and lived experience. We're also incredibly fortunate to have the conversation guided by Professor Jennifer DeVere Brody. Professor Brody holds a PhD in English and American literature from the University of Pennsylvania and is a distinguished scholar whose work spans African and African American studies, gender and sexuality studies, and visual and performance studies. Her leadership at Stanford has been widely recognized. She serves as the chair of theater and performance studies and later as faculty director of the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, where she secured a major Mellon Foundation grant and helped develop the vision for the new Institute for Advancing Just Societies. She is the recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship for Fine Arts Research, and she curated Edmonia Lewis, Indelible Impressions at the Cantor Arts Center, an exhibit that, like today's conversation, engages deeply with questions of race, representation, and artistic legacy. Professor Brody's interdisciplinary insight and commitment to critical conversations on race, performance, and representation makes her an ideal interlocutor for this evening's discussion. Together, Professors Mithlo and Brody will guide us through a conversation that is as much about art as it is about power, belonging, and the reimagining of global cultural spaces. So with that, please join me in welcoming Professor Nancy Marie Mithlo and Professor Jennifer DeVere Brody.
I just want to say how excited and proud I am to be here today, to be back at Stanford after literally almost 40 years. Teresa has been a longstanding collaborator, a friend. Her intelligence, her heart, her love for this community, her commitment, it is just extraordinary. And I love opportunities to tell women, especially Native women, they are extraordinary. So I'm going to have you put your hands out. It's an honor pin. It's a Morning Star. The artist is John Paul Rangel. And the Morning Star, of course, teaches us that there's always hope. There's always a new day. We live in dangerous times where a lot is uncertain. And I think that remembering the next day and our collectivity is really key. So thanks for letting us have fun just then. I love breaking the frame.
Yes. Thank you for helping me participate in that too. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's such an honor, and I want to echo Nancy's words about Teresa. We got to work together closely when I was at CCSRE, and her insights and just her continuing support for Native students, Native studies, and the community has been an inspiration. So I agree with that. And I'm really humbled and a little nervous to be here with Dr. Mithlo to have some time talking, which is also a method. She believes very much, I think, in dialogue, in conversation,
Gossip.
telling tales that are,
Spill
you
the
know,
tea.
meaningful. So we hope tonight will be fun and looking forward to your questions. So maybe we have on the screen there the phrase when and where we enter, which comes from my tradition in terms of Black feminist theory, was originally proffered by the first woman to get her PhD from the Sorbonne, but she had been formerly enslaved. And her book, A Voice from the South by Anna Julia Cooper, talked about when and where we enter. Because she was a woman, the whole race enters with me. But what really impressed me in reading through Dr. Mithlo's work and learning from her just a vast experience in this incredible book, which documents so many of the undocumented, if you will, and I mean that in the full sense of the word, work in Venice, which I got to witness, but is to really expand it and take seriously, as Teresa said in the introduction, this question of the how. So it's not just inclusion in, you know, a small sense, but rather trying to think about what my colleague Khalil Joseph in his new film might call terms and conditions. And you have such a profound understanding, I think, of how this phrase has resonated in your own work, which you use, which talks about, again, the value of Native art is also to proffer Indigenous knowledge, which is then against a kind of commercial vein in that way. So can you talk some more about how you use the phrase? Because you end it in your book, Knowing Native Arts, which is before the new one, that's Redskin. That's the final conclusion to that book. You talk about this as well.
Yeah, I think it's just agency. I'll just put it under agency, right? It's that we belong everywhere. The idea of inclusion is always so weighted because it means that you're asking someone for admittance. And I love the idea that Native people belong everywhere all the time. And so the idea of like the first, I always kind of do a critique with my students. Like when we say the first, you're the first, it's kind of a colonial move, right? The first, what does that mean? Like we've always been here. We're still doing this stuff. We're going to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's like Jean Quick to see Smith's wonderful piece where she says 40,000 years of art,
Yeah,
or
no,
more.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's look at some images. I mean, a lot of people, of course, know Venice for its beauty and its history and just the rich culture, everything about it. I have to always argue that Venice is a field site. My other field site was Santa Fe. And I think people get the idea of, oh, you're just like sipping a drink, watching the sunset, enjoying all of that. And that is true. And guys, that's important, really. Grab the fun. We all need it. But I entered into this by way of this wonderful woman in that top slide grinning at us. That is Brenda Croft. She's First Nations Aboriginal. She's at the Australian National University. She's a photographer and a theorist, and I was honored to watch her march through her PhD. So she's Dr. Croft now. My way to get to Venice was that I was working for the Native American Preparatory School. This was kind of an experiment. It was in Santa Fe. It was run by the Ettinger family. I think they were publishers. He wanted to try it on the boarding school model again. I mean, the good thing about it was that I had a ton of junior high school kids, and I had this remarkable Aboriginal leader, and his name was Lindsay Croft. At the end of our summer program in Santa Fe, there was a terrible car accident. Lindsay died in that accident, and some of our kids were in the car. They were actually headed out to Los Angeles from New Mexico after the school program ended. So Brenda came over with her father, Joe Croft, and that was my original introduction. It's kind of like with Stanford. I told the story at noon about how I wanted to go to Berkeley. I came out here on a train and I just sat next to a student who said, oh, you should apply to Stanford. And I was so innocent. I was just like, I've never heard of it. Is it a good school? I was living in the woods. I mean, I was doing a whole different thing at that stage in my life. Same with Venice. She was like, you should come to Venice, the Biennale. Never heard of it. Is it a big deal? And she's like, yeah, it's a really big deal. You should do it. So I went to basically support Brenda, and she introduced me to this whole world of art. So it's an epicenter. It's known as the Olympics of art. It's been around over 100 years. I mean, look into Venice. I'm not going to go too far into Venice, but you can see from this crew here, we just kept bringing people and doing exhibits and partnering with the city of Venice, which was a new way to do the Biennale. Most people think that the Biennale just means you're chosen by a host country, and it's like a World's Fair. And there's some truth to that. But there's 6 ways to enter into Venice. I'm not going to go over all 6. I will if you ask me in Q&A. But we invented the 6th way. And that way was that we worked with Venetian people. They gave us their spaces. The University of Venice, Ca' Foscari, gave us a space, 5 biennales. We were hosted by the Casa del Cinema. I mean, we met Venetian people as indigenous people to the nation state of Italy. They have unique culture, they have unique language, they have a unique way of being in life. And I think most people, when they get to Venice, they think of it as like something unreal, that it's just a prop or a play. It's not. Those are real people. This is their culture. This is their home. So we were guests in their territory. And that's how we got in. We had this wonderful indigenous woman, and we kept inviting people.
And that sort of non-hierarchical engagement of hanging out, of making art in the space, I think comes through in the book. And the opening of chapter 3 does talk about dispelling that myth of how else one can participate. And part of that success was actually the not belonging, as you say, but being present. And over 20 years, that's documented from the eye of someone who is a cultural anthropologist, where, you say that's your strength much more than aesthetic theory or, art history, capital A, capital H, if you will, that sort of institutional perspective. And there's just so much in the book that's addressed ideas for students on how to really engage so that you understand Indigenous ways of knowing through the art and
This
the
is
art practice.
Why I'm grateful for Jennifer for reading the book and preparing for today, because there's stuff in the book I don't even know that I did. I was like, really? I did that? I think it's because I'm such a like educator. I come from 7 generations of educators on my mother's side. And so I think throughout the book, you're right. I didn't even notice. I would take the reader aside and say, hey, students, pay attention. Don't say the first, okay? That's a colonial move. Don't do that. Okay. Number 2, I forgot that I gave them actually like marching orders, but I guess I did.
Yeah, no, I read it in one sitting. It's so good. Can you talk a little bit more about the different iterations? Because over, the many times you were there, things changed. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I mean, when we started, and we'll get into, should we go to that next slide to do the not all success is success and not all failure is failure? So I found about Venice. I went to support my friend Brenda. We made a mistake. We were out late. We had kids. We probably had been drinking wine, and we broke a key in a lock. And that led to us meeting this lawyer, Giancarlo Adorno, who was wonderful. He was so enthusiastic about our artwork. He's like a 7th generation Venetian. His people were building ships before they became lawyers. He had every Biennale catalog, and he chronicles in the book, like I have every catalog that's ever been published on the Venice Biennale. And he thought this was a great idea. He's like, bravo, you should do this. And so I just reached out with the facts, guys. We didn't have internet, just so you know. There was still the Lear, like this was ancient history. But I reached out.
The date is 1999.
Yeah, I reached out to this guy, Harold Zaman, and I just said, hey, we're a sovereign nation. We're not the United States, and we want you to accept us as a sovereign nation. And he wrote back and he was like, okay, that's, regarding your project, I believe that I love this, although not all the proposals, all of the same quality. Like there's a little like, it would be a good exhibition. It would be nice if Native American, singular, could be represented. I just love this. So I didn't even know who this guy was. And as it turns out, he's like the biggest, most important international curator of the last century. And the Getty Research Archives took all of his archives. I went through all of them. The only thing I found was this picture of him as a kid. And so I knew, okay, he probably loved playing Indians, and he was like a typical European who thought we were cool. But, run with that thing. That's great. So I had no idea who he was. And so for the first 3 Venice Biennales, we were sanctioned. So out of the 6 ways to do this, you could be something they call extra 50. It changes, collateral, parallel every year. And it was free for the first 2 years. So Harold Zaman was just like, yeah, come on. So we had to get money for everything, guys. I mean, we had to get the house, we had to get the space, we had to get all this stuff. And honestly, the money part of it's really interesting, how we financed. I confessed at lunch that I went bankrupt one year, but that was a long time ago. But the first 3, we had that recognition. So we were in the Venice Biennale catalog, which is like the Bible of Venice, official. And then they started charging like, I don't know, 5,000 euro, 20,000 euro. It kept getting more. But the first year we exhibited in 1995, we were one of 11 collateral exhibits, which was just like unheard of. So I think we like found a little warm spot. And now there's like 50 of these collaterals. I mean, there's a lot. It's become a thing.
Well, you've done so much, and I think it's great that we have the chronicle of it. And I was going to mention and make sure the students in the room following your lead know that Nancy has very, very generously donated her archives here to Stanford. So this material obviously is available in the book, but there's so much more to say and comparative work to be done, I think, in looking at these quote unquote unofficial ways of being present, seeing where folks have been and how they got there.
Yeah, the Jean Quick-to-See Smith, I have letters from her. We exhibited a piece that I don't think people even know about. It's heard around the world. It's made of cloth. It's on a motor. It moves. It has a soundtrack. The only thing we had was like a Walkman back in the day. And during the opening, someone stole the Walkman. and it had the only tape of the audio for Jean Quick to see his best work. That was just it. That was the first day out, you know. It was an experiment. Everything was an experiment. But there are records of things people don't know about. I don't think anyone has chronicled Jean doing installation art with sound about gun violence, you know. I mean, but there's a lot of fun stuff in there. So yeah, please go to the archive.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do you want to say a little bit more about how you conceive of failure, quote unquote, and success? Because, you know, I think at one point you do say the success was being present, and that the failure, you know, could also be a way to recapitulate what some people from the outside, right, you think of failure is in fact a refusal to either be transparent and a refusal to participate on the grounds in which that is given in a kind of settler colonial paradigm. And I love what you do with twisting those words and putting them through more of a sense of from an Indigenous perspective.
I had great help from a lot of theorists. So, but we thought I might just read like 3 lines from this. So I'm going to read something from the book. What I wish to suggest is that the events I chronicle have relevance beyond sheer inclusion alone. Success is not framed as the ability to be admitted to a powerful institutional structure only, but success in this scenario is the accomplishment of an inner transformation to expand the expectations we have of ourselves, and in doing so, to perhaps inspire others. In telling the tale, I hope to reference the multiple and sometimes contradictory ways that contemporary American Indian people move on the landscape, what values are championed, what conflicts exist, how we, the collective of natives and allies, make sense of these particular circumstances of transnational dialogues, opportunities, and challenges is the stuff of my tale.
It's beautiful. And you iterate that in a lot of different ways. And it's, I think, so important. And I think it matches as well with your idea around curation. So, you know, that you have to think about what is the ultimate meaning. So that line about, you know, transforming oneself, the inner vision, we were just talking about that before we sat down here. But can you say just maybe a little bit more?
You know, I want
that?
to show this slide of Gabe. So this slide right here, I talked about it when we were setting up. I love this slide because you've got these 3 buff guy sculptors, right, out in the suntan. And this is my daughter, Lozen, and she was about 4 at this time. So in the book, I just do a straight caption of the Umbilicus Project Team 2001, left to right, and I just name her, you know. But this young man here, Gabe Shaw, amazing individual. I mean, he came to Venice because he was a student of mine at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and I brought him over, and we started including mentorship as a part of every year that we go to Venice. So my long-term strategy, American Indian curatorial practice, is work that is long-term, mutually meaningful, reciprocal, and with mentorship. So if someone asks you if you're a student out there, or you're a curator, and they want you to just like pop in and do something really quick for them, you can just say right back, like, is this a long-term project? Is it meaningful for me? Are you giving me something in a reciprocal fashion? Are you teaching someone else so that the future has this? Like, you got to check those things. You got to do that thing. So, you know, having Gabe be a part of this really started changing things. And each year, what you'll see in each of the chapters is there's a disaster every chapter. There is something that goes freaking wrong, really bad, every chapter. And the book starts with me kind of losing my mind at a hotel in the Lido, and it ends with me like saying, I think I'm okay now, but still kind of messed up because I'm still worried about the world and the circumstances we all live in. Another thing that I do in this, and I'll just add this while I'm talking about it, it was good that I waited 20 years for this. I had a contract like 15 years ago. I could have done that book, but I kept doing biennales instead. But one of the things I found out was that there was a generational approach. So my tribe is known by our imprisonment for 28 years. So my grandfather, Watson Milthlo, was born a political prisoner, indefinitely detained in the United States. And he was still living when I got my PhD in 19. So this is like recent history for us. So he was a survivor. right? My parents, they were strivers. They both worked for my mom was a white school teacher in the black school. My dad worked for housing and urban development. They moved us to the deep South. Crosses were burned, synagogues were bombed. That whole thing was happening, right? And so for them, they just wanted middle class lifestyle, right? They wanted to get their kids into the best school. They were really trying to strive. And then for my generation, and this is self-confessional, not really functional as a lifestyle choice, but I'm an achiever. Like I'm the generation that's like, not on my watch is this going to happen. I'm getting rid of global racism. I'm going to change the Venice Biennale. We're going to have big plans
You did
ahead.
that.
We're just gonna like do it. And at the end of the day, though, that's a colonial move too. Like you get very exhausted. The institution sucks all of your energy, and then they keep doing what they want to do anyway. So that's why over time, this being non-institutional was really important, and failure was really important. So everyone thought we were going to build up to being in the US Pavilion. Everyone wanted me to do that thing. They wanted us to create an institute, and our gang kept talking about possibilities. The best was Jim Logan's shared house. He's like, we should have a place in Venice all the time, and Native people should come there all the time. And that seemed, the shared house sounded great, you know. We would always see each other. The best compliment I got from Jim Logan was he said at one point, you know, we didn't have housing, we're having problems with funding, but we knew Nancy would be there, and that gave us some hope. So we knew we would get back there. And he was from the Cantor Arts Council, so this is a Canadian doing that. So in any case, this idea of like, what, persevering, doing the impossible, I don't know, self-confessional, it's really tiring. But it's a good impulse. And the next generation, I call them like dreamers, but now I'm calling them demanders. These are my students, they're demanders. And it's pretty cool to see how the generations have changed over time. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a story too about what kind of ethical person you are helping people get out of prison so that they could document and have these photos.
I didn't want to out Gabe, but yes, I did bail him out of prison for making a political statement. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Okay,
Where are we?
we
Let's show some
have-
pictures.
Yes.
this is
This
fun.
one's good. Yeah. So I think earlier you mentioned, you know, sort of like the Academy Awards. And again, this is your analogy in the book that the Golden Lion, which is the major prize for the Biennale, it looks like this. It's the Golden Lion. And there's also an Indigenous Golden Lion that was gifted to one of the Italian collaborators. And it's by Wes Running Buffalo, who made it and bestowed it. And again, it was a moment of joy over dinner, unscripted, unplanned. And it's those kinds of moments of joy, I think, that you do lift up throughout all the quote unquote failures and disasters in the book.
Yeah, I actually say in there, like, you know, Indians having a good time in Venice, everyone should do that. It's like amazing thing. Like, you know, howl at the moon, bang on the tables, you know, make a ruckus, all of that. So this was a restaurant. This is Mario DiMartino, who's one of the 4 Italians that I profile in the book. Mario was the on-the-ground curator. He found space in Venice. And just let me make a moment to say Venice is very unique, right? You can't just go there and buy. You can't just go there and rent. You have to like know someone who knows someone who knows someone. And then you have to pay all those people some money. And it's great, you know, it really is. But Mario stuck with us like family. I mean, every time he'd be just like, when are you coming back? Do you need the apartment? We could do this. I have an idea. He got us our free space in Venice. He's just a remarkable human being. So 2 of the artists, well, Kelly Mashburn and Marcella Ernest, were about to see their work, their films. Kelly commissioned this piece, and none of us knew she was going to do it. But at the end of every Biennale, which each one had a theoretical premise, I don't know if we'll have time for that, but each one we were doing something really cool, some heavy lifting. And we would all go to this restaurant and there would be a big rowdy table and we would just take over the place. So yeah, this was our success.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add one other thing to make sure that I learned from the book. I think it's Carolyn Jones who success it, but that these world fairs, this is based on the ones where we were exhibited as exhibits, you know, Ishi or the Venus Hottentot, you know, that basis, so that the Venice Biennale still carries some of that weight of its history and genealogy. And I love the way that this book completely not only outs that, but overturns the whole premise of what it is a gathering should be.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. We just made different ways to enter, and I think anyone has that opportunity. Today at lunch, I told the students, ask for what you want, even if you think it's impossible. I mean, I just like asked this guy who I thought was a nobody, who turns out to be the curator of the last century, like, we want in, ask. And he was like, yeah, come. Sometimes it is that simple, right? Yeah.
So this section is called To Pray for Water. And oh, wait, you have to just tell a little bit about this.
Well, so the last two exhibits, there are 9 exhibits, and the last 2 were related, Ganitha and Washka. So these are Osage concepts, and I can only like approximate what they are because these are deep philosophical, spiritual concepts. And I was just lucky enough to be able to get to know something of it. So Kelly Mashburn is our Osage artist, was working with Marcella Ernest. The Ganitha is if life is falling apart and all order is gone. And if you think about Native people, we are post-apocalyptic people, survivors, right? That or Osage philosophy is you watch the seasons and you watch how people move from being a baby to an adult to an old person, and that your knowledge comes from that, right? You observe the land, you observe life. And then Washka is another really powerful reference. And so we'll be looking at 2 films from Washka. Washka is very similar to a piece of wisdom I got from my uncle. It was really fabulous. He laid this down on me, and I was so surprised the Osages, of course, they have something really similar to this, which is like, you can never go back. You can only go forward. And with a good heart, many blessings will come, right? So like people could say that maybe if they're struggling with addiction, like, Washka, like it's in the past, I've got the future. But you could say it with genocide, like Washka, you've got the future. So these exhibits were happening during the water protector movement. This is my cousin, Jennifer Birdshead, and she was working in Washington, and I got a ticket and went. And we marched, and I ran into a friend at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, Bertie Lynn Harlan. She is Eastern Band Cherokee, and they ended up helping us financially to get over to Venice to show the work of Shan Goshorn, who is deceased. She's passed on, an amazing basketry artist and photographer as well. So we started out with this idea of, Native women in the environment. Marcella Ernest, Chippewa, Anishinaabe, made a call for people to send her videos. She did this, as you can see on Facebook. Marcella is so great. She taught youth how to use film on just an iPhone. Her philosophy was everyone should have access to media, and she was going to teach you how to make things. She's at the University of New Mexico as a professor in art history now. But she just did a call for water. And everyone sent her something, and that was our piece that we showed for Washka. I relate in the book how we had a symposium afterwards. We already had a symposium, and there's records on these if you guys want to look deep. And we had a guy raise his hand and say, well, how did you choose which ones of these to show if it's curated? And she said, I didn't choose. I put everything in there. And he was like, well, that doesn't make sense. How could you do that? And she was like, they were prayers for water. Do you want me to tell someone their prayers aren't good enough to be in my film? No. So this idea of inclusion was different. And during that Q&A, I realized in the book I relate, like that's what we've been doing all along. Like all these exhibits were basically prayers, right? They were really us wanting better for ourselves, our people, and the world, right? They were all prayers.
I think we maybe can even open it up.
Let's
to the
open it.
audience.
Let's open it. Let's
I
do
mean, is there
it.
anything else you wanted to
You have
share
so
with
many
us?
great notes. Look, she's so prepared. I just love this.
Well, it's such an honor, and I'm so
Oh my
humbled to be
gosh.
here speaking with you. I've learned so much from your work, and
Oh.
not just what you've written, but your example
Oh.
and your way of being in the world,
Ooh.
because you are, yeah, and just incredibly
Oh,
generous. And I
wonderful.
love collaboration. That's your sort of watchword, and Yeah, it's
Thank you, hon. We also color coded tonight. I don't know if you noticed. but
unexpectedly. There's a
red
lot of
flag.
improvisation
We're
that
sisters. We
happens.
didn't know it. It's happening. Anyway, yes, I would love to hear from you guys, please. I mean, this is, you write something for forever and then you just put it out in the world and you kind of don't know what happened. So I'm really love responses, anything you got.
Thank you for your work. We're at a really interesting time, especially in academia, where we see kind of the contraction of multiple perspectives into one, where we see things like multicultural centers or multi-ethnic studies. Can you talk about how your work, especially with the exhibitions at the Biennale, have drawn out the importance of the specific and the unique, and that when we do that contraction, what's being lost?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Wow. Yeah, I think that's a big question of Venice, right? Is bringing all the world's cultures together on one global stage, another act of imperialism. Like, what is liberatory about that? I think that through the 9 exhibits, we did different things. So I'll try to walk through real quick. But Ceremonial in 1999 was really about witnessing. And it wasn't tribally specific as much. Like, we knew that we were doing something and we wanted to play with the concept of standing on ceremony and it being empty, but ceremony being something that can't happen unless people are there enacting something. We felt like we were doing a ceremony by going to Venice. Umbilicus was really, it was inspired by your people, Muskogees. It was Richard Ray Whitman's statement. He presented our group, and these were all just like it would take 2 years of just planning, and we would have 20 people or 25 or 5 people, and they were educators and activists and different folks. Anyway, what Richard brought to our group one year was a picture, and it was an ultrasound of his granddaughter. So it was his daughter's belly and ultrasound. It's called Celia. It's a beautiful piece. And he was like, I want to know what the center of the center is. What constitutes that? So you could say this is like exercise in ontology, epistemology. I'm winking over there at Clementine. Clementine taught me those words. Yay. But you know, we every year had something like that. Okay, once we got to 2003, we had Shelley Nero, and that was the exhibit titled Redskin Dreams. And we were actually answering the director's call for art in the age of conflict. And so that's another aspect of the Venice Biennale. The director always does a call and you're responding to a call. But that was pretty specific because that was one artist. That was Shelley Nero, right? And she's from Brantford, Ontario. Like, you know, she's Mohawk and she's a Mohawk artist. She's a Mohawk woman. It's all Mohawk all the time. We did have Sherwin Betsui, the poet, who also was there. So I think each year it kind of depended. I think we experimented with all of those platforms, right? The one that you just saw, it's Osage, but it's also Chippewa, right? I mean, it's 2 women working together collaboratively who went to the Institute of American Indian Arts and were my students back in the day. Kelly used to babysit my girl who's 30 now. So, you know, it's a long time going that we had those connections. But to get to your large, what's lost and what's gained, I thought that we were gaining a lot being on a global context just because it changed everyone. And that made them like a more what? I don't want to use the word intelligence, like self-aware. It challenged them. They became someone different going through the process. Your son went to Venice, so you probably witnessed this yourself. I mean, Gabe, the moment that I loved the best was we got a ride somehow impossibly from a collector on a like a speedboat, a taxi, which we could never afford. We were always on public boats. It took forever to get down the Grand Canal. Anyway, we somehow ended up on the red carpet going into the Venice Biennale on the vernissage on the day of. And there's like my student, and just seeing his whole body language change. And he was just like, wow, you know, he just walked into this setting like I belong. And he did. Kelly Mashburn, when she came back in 2017 from seeing the Venice Biennale, and she said, my work is as good as that. That's what I want. That's what I'm about. And so that does come down to an individual person, individual like culture that they represent. And we think that by them going home and having that magic, that moment where they've challenged and done something new and stretched and maybe failed and got back up, that makes those communities, those tribal communities stronger. right? But I do kind of love the group. I mean, the Institute of American Indian Arts, it's a big experiment, and, you know, having 575 tribes together. So I think there's strengths in both. But the global, we could talk all day about the global. It's a good question. Let's keep talking about it. Yeah, thank you.
First of all, I want to say thank you for the great conversation between you and Professor Brody. I have been thinking a lot about this sort of durational relationship that you have sometimes with pieces of art, and especially the people who make it. And I really like this sort of methodological approach that you have about this sort of, that it needs to be sort of a relation that comes back to you, and in a way you also give back a part of yourself to the community, in this sort of long-term relationship. And I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more about this sort of resistance to the categories or the norms that are already established within the circulation of art. And I love how you began the talk by saying out of the frame. So I feel like that sort of phrase already encapsulates like a position within the category. So I wonder if you can speak about that, and maybe a little bit more lessons on how to create in the current presence, especially Indigenous art.
Thank you. Let's start with the second one first, how to curate. So I often just tell folks, like, do you know artists? And they'll be like, yeah. And I'll say, do you got a garage or like a front yard or something? Like, yeah. Okay, we'll put the art in that space and invite a lot of people, and maybe have someone who does music and someone who can bring food. And then you've curated a show. So just like every weekend you could do that, just like start doing that. I mean, the Institute of American Indian Arts, where I was trained originally in the 80s, back in the day, but before Stanford. It's a tribal college, right? Amazing work, but Charles Daly, who ran that program, non-native ally, we had to produce an exhibit every 2 weeks. I mean, and this is a tribal college, like we had to turn it over. And that meant you had to get the toilet paper, you had to get the coffee, you had to clean the bathroom, you had to hang, you had to make those labels. Like, it was just like boot camp. We were just producing exhibits. Now we had our own collection, but get this, that collection was amazing because back in the day, I don't think people know this, we could check out things and take them to our dorm rooms. So I literally slept with a Maria Martinez pot. Really, I took it home, I took it to the dorm room. We used to serve punch out of that thing. But that was the philosophy. Okay, T.C. Cannon, the best painter ever, another Oklahoma guy. I helped repaint one of his paintings. It's terrible. No, they were like, hey, we want you to clean this off. And they left. And I was like, okay, I get some water, spray, wipe on the T.C. Cannon. I mean, it was our art. It was our stuff. It was our school. We belonged. We were working with it, using it, you know, petting it, messing it up a little bit. I mean, we're doing that. Of course, it's all changed now. But I think there's a great freedom in that. And I really credit the tribal college system. So TCU's guys, support them. They're amazing. I learned that my pathology was not my own, but it was systemic. You know, I was the white Indian chick who had North Carolina plates at the time. I mean, it was great. It was really a good experience to go through that. The global thing, you and I were talking about that earlier, and I told you something flippant, and I'm so sorry. I was just, I got to have a better answer.
I like irreverence,
Oh,
not to worry.
I have to have a better answer because I was just like, I can't be bothered by all that. Like, it's so, I just want to like be with the people, present the stuff, have a good time, learn from it, like fail occasionally. I tell my students now all the time, if you're not failing consistently, you're not even trying, you know, like you've got to get in there. So I can't really pay attention to what the Academy thinks a lot. I really can't. I mean, it's just too much, right? I mean, it's enough just to figure out if here's what I'm going to say to the students is that there's work that only you and you alone can do. No one else can do it. Anyone could critique art history theory all day long. Anyone could pick that thing up and run with it. But you guys, you've got a new idea. You've got a new thought. And that is where you want your juice to go. You know, you got to read the stuff. Yes, you have to cite some stuff. Yes, but you can't really worry about where it lands, because if you worry about where it lands, then what? I don't know. For me, I find it self-inhibiting. For me, I mean, for every student, you learn a different way. So I'm sure you've got your own bag of tools, your own magic tricks. So just go out there and do it.
Second that. You say follow your passions, and it's mostly worked out, but it's a hard thing, especially, you know, for first generation, for, you know, just the way the system doesn't groom you to do something like that, to follow that kind of vision, especially when you're making art, when you're trying to make a difference in that kind of profound way. Yeah. But let's hear other questions from the audience.
I'm really curious, as a fellow anthropologist, what's special about doing this in Venice with Venetians, right? So I'm just really interested in how interacting with local people over time made it different than if you had done it in Atlanta or Houston or Sydney. Right? What was special about Venice?
So I have to give props to Laura publicly, because she helped get me here and was always the big sis in anthropology. And thank you, Laura, for always being a step ahead of me. I just love you. So what was special about Venice? I mean, again, I didn't know anything about Venice. I went because my friend was exhibiting and she asked us. And what I loved was that there was this, and maybe you could get this in some other location, I don't know, but this kind of a specificity, maybe to get back to Blue's question, like it's a very specific culture, right? And there's a great like love of, I'm going to say love of leisure too. Maybe that's Italian and not just specifically Venice, but like food, your children, your dress, how you put the art up. I mean, Mario, when he would find a space for us in Venice, which is very hard, he did one for Bill Viola once, and he was like, this space, you go in and your hair, it's like this on your hand. Like, you know, he knew how to make magic in a space because he knew that space so well. So if you're coming in and you're not paying attention to the peoples whose land base this is, which would be true for any culture, right? If you dismiss that, you don't know what you need to know to be excellent. You just don't, right? It's their land, it's their culture, it's their food, it's their language, like all of that, right? So I think we were just very fortunate that we had these Venetian people that were so devoted to this craft. I mean, it is a craft to curate. It is a craft to be in Venice. But Venetian people in general, and I can't take credit for knowing a whole lot about the culture historically. I can just say that the city itself is challenged, right, with tourism, right, with pollution. A lot of things are going on there, and most of those day-to-day folks actually, you know, don't really pay attention to the Venice Biennale. I mean, it's over there on the other side of the gate. It happens. A lot of people come. It's probably irritating. It helps the businesses thrive, so that's good. But there's so many problems there. And I think that the way that we met was really, we shared the same problems, right? About food acquisition, about an environment, about our kids not staying there and wanting to move somewhere else, right? About how do we have housing? Housing is a huge issue in Venice. Like, we were sharing the same cultural issues and it was that depth too, I think, of us coming back. They were always like, so you're coming back, you know? Yeah, you're coming back. So this summer I'm coming back to deliver the books, you know, to folks in Venice and to check back on them. And we've, you know, time has changed. We've been ill. Some people have passed, you know, but I don't know. I heard, this is me when I'm in class and I go off, and I promise this will be short, but I saw a documentary on the Beatles recently, and it was like, someone said, we just all kind of fell in love with each other, and that's why it worked. And so I don't know. I think I'm going to say, like, I don't fall in love with every site that I happen to be in, Atlanta or whatever. I mean, but we all kind of fell in love with each other. Like, we respected each other. We wanted to hang out with each other. You know, we wanted to do things, learn things together. I think that's special. I don't know why Venice. I don't, but it has that. It has that.
It's beautiful.
I'm very excited to ask you a question. I read your other book before.
Oh, thank you.
So I think one thing that I think of is how do you imagine sort of, sorry, how do you imagine sort of the lessons that you've learned of bringing Native arts to something that is so institutionalized like the Venice Biennale? How can that be expanded to Native groups outside of the United States? Particularly, I'm asking from the perspective of Central America, where we're often appropriated by the nation state for aesthetic while actively being subjugated, and the kind of handcrafts that we do are often sort of dismissed as cheap things to be bought by tourists and not an art form in themselves.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Thanks for sharing. I have to say, I kind of push back and problematize the Venice as being a great big art barrier. It's not. It's completely permeable. I mean, the 6 ways to enter, let's just do it quickly, okay? A nation asks you to exhibit. In the book, I actually use a lunchroom cafeteria analogy about this. I cite Mean Girls, the film, and where you sit in the lunchroom is everything. So, you know, that's a teacher's pet designation. Most people don't take it that seriously, really. I mean, I know there's a dialogue about that, but, you know, then you could be invited by the director, and you're in basically the Arsenale space. So you've been invited by the director. The director oversees the pavilions, right? But the pavilions are very independent. Each country runs the pavilion. You could be accepted, as we were, as a parallel exhibit. So you get sanctioned by the Venice Biennale, and it costs maybe 20, 30,000 euros, and you're in the book. That's a whole nother way to do it, right? You could hire a private gallery and just do that. That's like self-publishing. You know, you don't want to do that. You could also, there's this thing that happened where people would get a deteriorating castle at Palazzo, and they would invite you and say, you've been invited to the Venice Biennale. It will only cost you $30,000. And they get like 50 of those people, and then they do repairs on the house. And you think you've exhibited. A lot of people do that. Don't fall for that one. And so our way, we thought we were the 6th way, which is we partnered with the city of Venice. They gave us our space for free most of the time. And then we worked with public-private entities on different islands, you know, but we were always like getting something from the community where we were. So, you know, I felt like Venice was very permeable and very open. But to your question about indigeneity, Venetian art endeavors have, the indigenous is cool, hip, and it's everywhere now. So, you know, it has become a commodity in some ways. And I don't mean that as like a criticism, but it's definitely part of the dialogue. And by that, I mean indigenous globally, whether we're speaking about South Central America, the Sami, I mean, the indigenous is a new product, I think. But it could be, as Vine Deloria says, just something that comes every few years, like you know a friend who's indigenous, you know, you read a book, and then it goes away again. And that could happen very much. And in fact, I see it happening. The Los Angeles Frieze, I mean, there was barely any art. And just 2 years ago, it was like smashing with indigeneity. So I would be like careful. My research actually says that more visibility equals heightened bias. So I work with a cognitive scientist about audience research studies, and especially indigenous audiences. So if you want to, it's on my website, and I'm happy to share out, but that's an active research question. Just being there, just being visible does not mean people are going to automatically understand your plight and do something about it. No, I mean, the entrance narrative is still everything. You come in, you see what you want to see, you check the box, and you leave. It's a real challenge.
As you say, seeing is a social actor. So seeing is more than seeing. You have to think about the history, the memory, and the perspective, you know, so it's not just there to be enjoyed in a certain sense, but you have to really think about the context is as important as the art.
Yeah.
Any last questions?
We've talked enough.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the Cantor Museum for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you to the American Indian Studies, Native American Studies. Appreciate all of you. Thank you for coming.